speakers for such interesting presentations, and thanks to all of you who stuck it out to the end. This is Melanie Austin. She lives in Brownsville, Pennsylvania, which is a decaying industrial town in the western part of the state, a state where we know there are a lot of people angry at the government. A state that went overwhelmingly for Donald Trump in the Republican primaries, and that he also won in the general election. Austin grew up in a family of coal miners and rail workers. She herself had been a rail worker. She lost her job. She wasn't laid off. She was fired for running a red light. In her overwhelmingly white community, unemployment is high. Her boyfriend is unemployed, and premature deaths are exceedingly frequent. Motivated by challenging and some would say even desperate circumstances, Melanie Austin and millions of others like her in Pennsylvania and across the country in the so-called Rust Belt, the decaying industrial areas of the country, have sought dramatic change and placed their hopes in the hands of a man who seemed to be the ultimate political outsider. And there you see the hat, Donald Trump. The man who promised to make America great again, the man who promised to put America first, and return power to a term he used in his inaugural address, the forgotten people. Trump's message resonated strongly with Melanie Austin, who felt alienated, lost in a community that was in decline, neglected by a crooked system. When Austin saw Trump on TV, she said, quote, "Finally, someone who thinks like me." For Austin, President Barack Obama came to represent the system that had failed her and so many others. She is a former Democrat. She believes of Barack Obama. She believes he's a foreigner, a Muslim from Kenya. She believes he's gay. When he, in 2012, expressed support for gay marriage, he concluded he's gay. When he, years later, directed the education department to allow schools to let transgender children to use bathrooms that are consistent with their gender identities, she concluded Michelle Obama is a man. And their marriage is merely for show. A video she watched on Facebook confirmed this belief. It alleged in that video that Joan Rivers, the comedian who died in complications from surgery, this video alleged that she was murdered for outing President Obama. A website called MrConservative.com claimed to have evidence that Michelle Obama was a man and had not given birth to Sasha and Malia. Austin herself expressed concern for Sasha and Malia, believing that they were kidnapped from Morocco to pose as the Obama's children. Now, I don't say this to mock her. She stated these beliefs openly in an interview with the Washington Post. I say this because on Facebook, online, she found communities, and the cement of those communities was what we call fake news. This fake news reinforced existing political beliefs and cemented communities around a specific political agenda. Of course, fake news is not a Trump-only or conservative-only phenomenon. Bernie Sanders supporters, some were duped into believing that Hillary Clinton had been funding ISIS, or that she had fake ballots in a warehouse somewhere in Ohio. And since the Democrats lost the White House, in addition to not having control of either house of Congress, evidence is increasing that Democrats and progressives are becoming increasingly vulnerable to fake news, to conspiracy theories. So fake news toward Democrats and progressives is on the rise. Prior to the election, purveyors of fake news found that there wasn't much of a demand, a market for anti-Trump fake news. They would try to do that, they wouldn't get clicks, and so they said, well, let's pro-Trump fake news, anti-Clinton fake news. Now, anti-Trump fake news is beginning to gather more of a following. And why? What's the connection there? It's a loss of power. according to political scientists Joseph Musinski and Joseph Parent, they argue that conspiracy theories thrive among societies in which there is what they call power asymmetries. And those people who are kind of left out, feel powerless, are more prone to believe in conspiracy theories. And I think following from that, we can say that those people who feel dispossessed, neglected, disempowered, are also more susceptible to fake news. And so that explains why liberals' declining power in government makes them more vulnerable to fake news. And more broadly speaking, the Melanie Austins of the world, feeling adrift in a treacherous sea whose violent waves they seemingly have little power to control, fake news can become their anchor. So it seems populist movements, which are often fueled by people who feel disempowered, disenfranchised, those same people are also drawn to conspiracies, hoaxes, fake news. So what is fake news? It's a much abused term, sometimes used to describe satire, or simply news I don't want to hear, or news I don't like. And that's what this cartoon is about. There's the Republican elephant and the Democrat donkey saying fake news at one another. So it'd be worthwhile to define our terms here. First, we should note that fake news is not a new phenomenon. And I'll get to that in a moment. But Claire Wardle of First Draft News has helpfully categorized misinformation and disinformation into these 7 categories. And I would argue that fake news fits best in these 3 categories. Imposter content, because these are people who are creating websites and other delivery systems of information that look like journalism, but they're actually not. They're fabricating information whole cloth, like Michelle Obama's a man, creating it out of thin air, or taking real events and manipulating them in such a way that their meaning entirely changes. Now, I think what binds these 3 together is because there's an intent here. It's hard to say, oh, I didn't mean to pretend to be someone else. There's clearly an intent to deceive. There's an intent to share, spread misinformation and disinformation. So the corrections page of a newspaper, doesn't mean that they're fake news. Journalists are humans, they make errors, and they're taking responsibility for them. There was no intent to deceive. With fake news, there is. Why is fake news getting worse? Why is it becoming this plague? Because as I noted earlier, it isn't anything new. Anyone who's waited in line at a supermarket register has seen front pages like this: bat-human hybrids, Clinton adopting a baby, the latest Elvis sighting. So it's not anything new, but it's certainly more rampant now. Part of that is because of the technology that's now available. It's easy to create and cost-free to create something. Just think 30 years ago, you want to create a fake New York Times, you actually have to print it out. You have to get the formatting right, print it, and stand on a street corner, and who has time for that? Now, it can be done. Sometimes I wonder who has time for this too, but people do. But it's much quicker, it's much easier, and when you share it on social media, this looks the same as if it was from CBS News or the Washington Post or Wall Street Journal. It can blend in. Furthermore, fake news is a commodity. There's a city in Macedonia where 100 pro-Trump websites were traced. And it's because they're making money. Not enough money that would support a large news outlet, but enough to buy a car and more. I'll return to this point in a moment. So it's easy, it's a commodity, and this is, I think, the most important factor. There is a receptive audience. Fake news would not thrive if there was not a demand for it. When we encounter bogus stories that confirm our beliefs, we are less likely to think critically about them and more likely to embrace them and share them. Customized news feeds. Facebook, once you're labeled as conservative or liberal, you're only going to get news reports consistent with that belief. It's like you identify yourself, that's my favorite sports team, and you're only going to get updates when they win and when their rival loses. So this is all feeding the fake news frenzy. So who is spreading fake news? These guys, for one. But why do this? This is Paris Wade and Ben Goldman, two young men in California. They founded the website Liberty Writers News. They're opportunists. Wade called himself and his partner, quote, the people on the side of the street yelling that the world is about to end. Only now they're not just on a street corner, now they're on social media with access to millions of people. Oh, and by the way, they don't actually believe the world is about to end. They cater to an audience who, according to Goldman, quote, don't trust the mainstream media. And they exploit this lack of trust for money. They've made as much as $40,000 in a single month. I'm in the wrong line of work, I think. Or, consider Boris, a Macedonian teenager, 18 years old. Between August and November 2016, Boris earned nearly $16,000 off of 2 websites in a nation where the average monthly salary is less than $400. Boris and others had no rooting interest in Trump, Clinton, didn't matter to them. But this fake news was filling their bank account. So this commodification of fake news matters. Why else do this? Well, the creator of this website, and maybe you notice some things wrong with this. This is not ABC News. Some clues you might see, abcnews.com.co. It's clearly mimicking ABC News. And that's not quite ABC News' logo. Obama signs executive order banning the Pledge of Allegiance in schools nationwide. That didn't happen. But who is this? This is Paul Horner. And what does he say when asked, why are you doing this? He says, oh, it's just a goof. It's fun. It's satire. You don't criticize fiction writers for writing fiction. So he says, this is all fun. So the title of my presentation is Fake News Another Name for Propaganda? Now with these individuals, I don't know if it would be fair to categorize them as propagandists because they have no political axe to grind, no agenda. They're after money or kicks. Regardless of the intent, the effect is the same. They are deceiving the public. So, now, then there's another category. There are the people with a cause. They fabricate, manipulate information to achieve a political end. The man we're about to see is Mike Cernovich, and this is an excerpt from an interview with Scott Pelley of 60 Minutes. Cernovich runs a website called Danger and Play. His YouTube channel has thousands of followers. His tweets are read millions of times a day. Among the many dubious stories published on his website include Podesta spirit cooking emails reveal Clinton's inner circle as sex cult with connections to human trafficking. That's the infamous Pizzagate. American media has become a terrorist organization, incites violence, covers up crimes. And this next one.
Published this headline.
Hillary Clinton has Parkinson's disease, physician confirms. You don't think that's misleading?
No.
You believe it's true today?
Oh, absolutely.
That story was sourced to an anesthesiologist who never met Clinton. It got so much traction it had to be denied by Clinton's doctor and the National Parkinson Foundation.
She had a seizure and froze up walking into her motorcade.
Well, she had pneumonia. I mean...
How do you know? Who told you that?
Well, the campaign told us that.
Why would you trust the campaign?
The point is, you didn't talk to anybody who'd ever examined Hillary Clinton.
I don't take anything Hillary Clinton is going to say at all as true. I'm not going to take her on her word. the media says we're not going to take Donald Trump on his word, and that's why we are in these different universes.
He said one correct thing there. We are living in different universes. And his fake news and other fake news is spread far and wide by willing co-conspirators. Like this anonymous Twitter user actually works with other people and says we've got to amplify the noise. We've got to take the Cernovich article and spread it far and wide. He routinely gets 35,000 retweets a day. This one user who refused to give his name. So clearly these are people with a cause, a new breed of propagandists. Instead of the big lie that Adolf Hitler wrote about in Mein Kampf and Joseph Goebbels used to such destructive effect, we are bombarded with many small lies, death by 1,000 cuts. Fake news, though its impact is debated, clearly has shaped the conversation and amplified the noise. Groups have rallied around disinformation. And they are aided in part by purveyors of fake news from overseas with a political agenda. This is the Internet Research Agency in St. Petersburg, Russia, where much of the online mischief originates. Mischief like this. And this is, of course, just a sample. This is an article from New York Times Magazine, and it opens with a description of this agency planting fake news in a parish in Louisiana that there had been a chemical leak, that the chemical processing plants were malfunctioning, there's a chemical spill, you're all going to die. So their goals are varied. Sometimes they want to ensure the success of a political candidate who would further Putin's agenda or Russia's agenda. Sometimes they just generally want to promote discontent and disarray within rival nations. And of course, fake news and the populism it might inspire is not confined to the United States. These are all headlines about, as you see, France, Germany, Europe as a whole, Spain, Italy, Russia targeting the French election, Dutch election, German election, Ukraine, of course. And really, is nothing sacred? She did not. She did not. But you see how convincing this could be to somebody not paying close attention. It says it has a BBC News logo, BBC News UK. The BBC had to say, that's not us. Now, if you were taking a news literacy class with me or one of the other instructors, some things you might spot here, like only 230 retweets. The BBC would probably have more following than that. So there are some warning signs here. But somebody looking quickly. And a recent survey showed that, of Americans, showed that Americans tend to trust the person sharing it with them. So if it comes from Uncle Joe, oh, I love Uncle Joe. Oh, the Queen must have died. And nor is this confined to the West. Fake news has been used to spread hate, violence. In South Africa, for example, bogus stories about migrants and immigrants have been spread to sow xenophobia there. South Sudan, already racked by a years-long civil war, has escalated thanks to fake news about rival ethnic groups. In Myanmar, where the internet and social media are brand new, Facebook is being used as a propaganda tool to target Muslims there with bloody consequences. Mosques have been burned, Muslims murdered. Based on fake stories, propaganda. So it is having an effect. And this survey of Americans shows that 88% of Americans, those responded, said that there is some confusion. It's hard to make sense of all this, and that's understandable. Then it goes on, 23% admitted to sharing fake news. 14% said they shared it knowing it was fake. What their motives are, I don't know. But it's clear that it's spreading. And so yes, it's a troubling effect that people would believe a lie. That is troubling enough. But I think there's something else insidious taking place, occurring in the West and throughout the world. Purveyors of fake news are both exploiting and furthering an ongoing trend, and that trend is the erosion of trust that Americans and others have in key institutions. From the European Union to the United States government and the press all over the world, institutions are being rejected, yes, because of their own failings, but also because of the trumped-up charges and lies that circulate in the swamp that so many social media users and internet browsers swim in. This shows Americans' declining trust in the news media. And the downward trend is a long one, but notice the even more significant dip in recent years. Recently, on Earth Day, thousands, I didn't get the exact number, maybe millions of scientists and those who favor them marched for science. Yes, in response to proposed cuts to scientific research, but also because there's a lot of rejection of established science, whether it's climate change science or vaccines. The rate of measles vaccines in the United States is lower than the rate in Rwanda because of this anti-vaccine sentiment, the belief that it causes autism, even though there's no evidence for that. So, distrust of the mainstream media, distrust of science, distrust of government and government statistics. There are a lot of numbers there, but how many of the statistics reported by the government are reliable and accurate? And it breaks it down by party. 36% of Republicans said that a small portion of them are accurate. By the way, this survey, I didn't have time to work it into this, but was done again recently, but Republicans tend to trust government statistics again because their team won and they have their own guy in the White House. So the wind shift with the political changes. And this is public trust in the government over the last several decades. Now this is not to say, I want to clarify, that mass media and the government are themselves free of blame, of course. On the news media side, well-publicized errors and the rise of partisan news outlets like MSNBC and Fox News shoulder some of the blame for alienating parts of the news-consuming public. And this trend, it's no coincidence that Americans' trust in the government began a major decline with the Vietnam War, the Watergate scandal. The downward trend has continued as Americans have witnessed the impeachment of a president, a war in Iraq based on misinformation, and other scandals and disappointments. So that's all, of course, clear. Fake news can't take responsibility for that. They didn't distrust the news media back in the 90s because Clinton adopted an alien baby. But we are turning to other information providers. Are we turning to other information providers that are more trustworthy? Mike Cernovich? It would be one thing if Americans rejected old elites and authorities because of their actual failings and said, well, I'm going to find these people of integrity, conscience, I can trust. But instead, too many are turning towards snake oil salesmen and soothsayers. It's as if receiving a misdiagnosis from the doctor, we went to a quack who promised an elixir that's going to bring eternal life. Purveyors of fake news have filled the vacuum of trust with their own bombast and mendacity. Not a better alternative. Remember Mike Cernovich said, well, there's no evidence that Clinton had Parkinson's, and Pelley says, well, I don't trust the campaign. Well, but what alternative did he offer? An anesthesiologist who never examined it. So we're left groping for the truth. And I'm reminded of the words of Hannah Arendt, the scholar of Nazi Germany, who in a 1976 interview with the New York Review of Books said this: if everybody always lies to you, the consequence is not that you believe the lies, but rather that nobody believes anything any longer. And a people that no longer can believe anything cannot make up its mind. It is deprived not only of the capacity to act, but also of its capacity to think and to judge. So that's what we have to reclaim. Refuse to be confused, and reclaim our capacity to think for ourselves, think critically, and to act. Thank you.